Welcome to the final panel of the 31st Annual Conference of the Levy Economics Institute. We will be discussing aging in this session and public policy, debunking myths, providing solutions. We have 3 speakers and we'll go in order. We'll give about 15 to 17 minutes for each presentation. We could leave a fair amount for discussion. So please add your questions in the question box, in the chat box. The first presenter is going to be Teresa Ghilarducci, who's a professor at the New School for Social Research, the Irene and Bernard Schwartz Chair for Economic Policy Analysis, as well as the director of the Schwartz Center. Her new book, which I believe came out last month, is Work, Retire, Repeat, The Uncertainty of Retirement in the New Economy. So take it away, Teresa.
Yeah, sure. Can I share my slides?
Yes.
Okay. And do you see them? Yes. Everybody sees it? Okay.
Yes, you are good to go.
Yeah, so I had a hard time publishing this book. My other books were snapped up by publishers, I have to say, but this one took a lot of convincing because a lot of editors thought that when I described that most people wanted to retire, they bristled and they said, "Well, I don't want to retire. I want to just keep on working." And I felt that some of it was defensive because I think they're afraid, like many Americans are, being thrown out of work. And they also said that because they're oddballs. Academics are oddballs, and so are politicians. We happen to be a handful of workers who can control the pace and content of our jobs. We happen to be the handful of workers who aren't subordinated to a boss and who aren't surveilled in the workday about what we do. And that's probably, in the single digits in terms of how many Americans have those kinds of jobs. The problem is those kinds of Americans who make policy about retirement. People who sit in the Senate or who sit in the ivory tower, we think our work is great and we would like to just do it whenever we can. The problem is the policymakers have not been listening to the data and haven't been listening to people. About 40 years ago, and this is described in my book, Work, Retire, and Repeat, published by the University of Chicago. And it really points out that there is a great deal of uncertainty among Americans about their financial future. And policymakers have known that because 40 years ago, in the Reagan administration, policymakers cut Social Security benefits. So now people who collect from 62 or to 70 are facing a benefit cut of about 10 to 15% than it otherwise would have been if the Reagan cuts had not gone through. About the same time, unions were also weakened, and the defined benefit, the traditional pensions, also became less popular among employers. And a new form of pensions, the 401k, which are voluntary for employers to offer or not, were in ascendancy. And over 40 years, we found that over half of people do not even have a 401k plan, much less a traditional plan. And so they're coming into retirement with only Social Security to rely on. And we experts knew that. And the growing response to that predicted catastrophe was, well, if people didn't save enough, at least they can work longer. And this book interrogates whether or not people can work longer and what assumptions experts were making and political elites were making in thinking that working longer would be a solution to the retirement crisis. I conclude that working longer is not a solution to the retirement crisis, and instead we need a bold set of policies I have termed the Gray New Deal. Gray because it refers to a part of our life where we mostly all turn gray, and I want to lift up that with dignity and respect. And it's a new deal because it's a set of policies. It's not just one policy, and they're bold, just like the old New Deal. The Great New Deal is in the context of growing inequality. We already know about the growing inequality of wages and of income, and the persistent inequality of wealth, where much of the stock gains and the home ownership gains and the property gains have gone to the rich. We also now are aware that the most basic of human experience, living, is also those longevity gains, those improvements have gone to the rich. Here's one piece of data that showed that there have been longevity gains across all levels of society. Here I use educational attainment as a proxy for class. So everybody is living longer, that's true. But in the bottom half of the distribution, they're living longer. Their gains have been far less than 5 years. But at the top of the distribution, let's just take the top 10%, they've gotten 5.5 years, almost twice what the bottom has. So most of the longevity gains most of them have gone to the wealthy. In response to the inequality of lifespan and the inequality of retirement security or pensions, have been that people in the bottom half of the lifespan have tried to work longer in order to make up for their poverty level of Social Security. But in doing so, they have really shrunk their retirement time. Whereas people at the top may be working a lot longer, but their longevity gains have made up for it. So they haven't lost as much retirement time as people at the bottom. Here I show some numbers that took me 20 years to collect because I had to wait for people in my data set to actually live long enough and die, and then I could measure when they retired and when they died. And when I patiently waited for a large enough sample size, I saw a huge gradient or disparity by class with just retirement time. So even after the old New Deal, during the Great Depression, and we got Social Security and we got unions and we got pensions, we were distributing retirement time, that precious time before you die and after your work, to everybody. The rich, the poor, and ordinary workers could look forward to retirement. But now we're redistributing that time, and we're seeing that distribution is top heavy as well. It turns out that what explains retirement time, this is a regression. I don't expect you to look at all those numbers, but I have highlighted one thing that surprised me. One of the biggest reasons why people have any kind of retirement time, because that's what I'm explaining here in these statistical techniques, is if they have a pension plan. If they have a regular defined benefit plan or a traditional plan, then they can retire before they die, and then we can retire before ages 65 and 67. And that's what helps them give a little extra retirement time. And that's also because I also found data in my, I'm gonna skip that, in my data set, that for some people, not people that can control the pace and content of their time, but almost everybody else who is surveilled at work, whose work requires a lot more intensity, maybe because of the computer is good at surveillance or because the computer has really sped up the work. For people who don't control the pace and content of their time, work at old ages hastens their death. The old adage that work can kill is really quite true in this context. Older people who have to do a lot of stooping and bending, who are in a subordinate position at work, who require, who are subject to a lot of surveillance. Again, the computer in the Amazon warehouse really speeds up the work. or who are in front of a computer and are required intense concentration at fast paces, those kinds of jobs can raise cortisol levels, raise inflammation, and not only just hurt musculoskeletal works, but it actually causes inflammation and cardiovascular disease. So that as we take away pensions from that group, we're also lowering their longevity. The case against retiring is everybody's dead uncle. Everybody has a story of so-and-so who retired and they died the day after. And that was because that was an anecdotal impression. Gramsci talks about conventional wisdom, pervading throughout a society. Well, sometimes that conventional wisdom that men have to work, or work gives you identity, and work gives you pleasure, and work gives you sociability. Those kinds of common wisdoms actually don't show up in the data. So people did not control for the health status of the people who retired then died. But if you do that, if you do control for the health status of people and have a group that retired and the people that don't, the people who are who have retired are usually healthier. The case for retirement is that retirement among a broad swaths of the population boosts health. It makes you healthier because retirees are more likely to stop bad habits. Life satisfaction improves quite a bit in this first 4 years of retirement, and then health improvements help expand that life satisfaction. Most of the pathway for that are people who are controlling the pace and content of their jobs. People who retire from physical labor or psychologically demanding responsibilities also improves health. Retirement isn't just good for the small group of people who do physical labor. Retirement is good for almost everybody who cannot control the pace and content of their jobs. This is this idea that retirement saves you from the pain of work is something that a lot of other researchers have done. I was just on a panel with Angus Deaton, who wrote The Deaths of Despair and won the Nobel Prize in Economics. And the level of pain among workers is undermeasured, and it's especially true among older workers. Retirement gives them some relief to that chronic pain. The more cases for retirement. I have study after study, very much summarized in my book. I'm going to turn to politics and then close. The politics are really ripe for better pensions. I estimate that my suite of proposals do cost a lot of money, like $500 billion over 10 years, but most of that money comes right back to the people who contribute to their pension plan. So the money goes in, but it comes out when people retire, mostly in the form of a savings account, a pension for everybody that sits on top of Social Security. But I really want to bring our attention in closing to the fact that Americans do so much worse than our peers. Workers' earnings as a share of income to people over age 65 is actually much worse in America. Americans already have less retirement time. We have 13.6 years on average, whereas the Italians spend 19.8. I can look at other countries. Mexico does even better than we do. So we do not give that to our citizens. We also work more hours per day, more days per week, more weeks per year. We also work more years per lifetime. The poverty rate among the elders are much higher when we use international standards, 1 out of 4. Let me finish here. When people are asked, do they want a mandated pension plan? It's part of my Green New Deal. Most people, and it doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republicans, say that they do. They want to save more on their retirement. If we don't do something, we are going to end up being a nation of GoFundMe pensions. This is a story, it's a picture of a younger man and an 82-year-old. This younger man was a customer at Walmart. He saw this older man, Butch Marion, working as a cashier, felt sorry for the guy, had a conversation with him, and had a GoFundMe campaign amplified by TikTok, and raised $100,000 for this guy could retire. He didn't want to work longer. Working was not a love for him. He wanted to go visit his kids and have a couple of days off a week. This younger man might have helped save this guy's life and to prolong his life. I mean, that's easy. Those are feel-good stories, but we would need 72 million GoFundMe accounts in order to solve the retirement crisis. I'm going to stop there, recognize the people who did help me, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Teresa, for starting us off with some very provocative questions. We'll move on to Ed Lane. He's a finance practitioner who has been an asset manager for over 50 years. He's the owner of Lane Consulting, and has background that spans economics, procurement, asset management, and some academia. So off to you, Ed.
Thanks, Pavlina. Before I get into my presentation, which is all about financing for Social Security, I cut out a piece that had to do with benefit program changes because I was going to run out of time. But since Teresa talked about the impact on different people for extended retirement ages under Social Security, I thought that this chart, which I took out of my presentation, would be interesting. Can everybody see that?
Can you make it a little bit bigger? Yeah.
This one?
Yeah.
All right, hold it. I can do that. How's that?
Yeah, perfect.
So the main point here is pretty obvious, that people with lower household income have a lower life expectancy. And any decisions, like the decision that was made in the 80s under the Greenspan Commission to extend the normal retirement age under Social Security, which impacted everybody equally, obviously from the point of view of the people who have less retirement income, they are going to be greater, there's going to be a greater disadvantage to them. So I just wanted to reinforce what Teresa was saying. Okay, so I'm going to get on to my presentation if I can get it going here. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Today, I'm going to be talking about how Social Security is financed. That is, how is it paid for? The presentation is based on my paper called Saving Social Security, which is available on the Levy website or by writing to me at the email address that I have here. This subject is very topical, since as many of you know, the Social Security Trust Fund is projected to run out of money in about 10 years. As the title of the program says, this presentation will be about debunking myths and providing solutions. While most believe that Social Security is financed by tax dollars and that those tax dollars are sequestered to pay future benefits in what is popularly known as the Social Security Trust Fund, what Al Gore used to call the lockbox, I'll describe why that's not quite accurate. At the end of my discussion, I'll also offer some ideas to address the trust fund insolvency, not only for the immediate future, but for the long term. So there's an interesting backstory here. As you know, Franklin Roosevelt was elected in 1932 during the throes of the Great Depression. Even before the Depression hit, the states had been forced to deal with the problems of economic insecurity in a wage-based industrial economy. Workers' compensation and welfare programs for the elderly were established at the state level before Social Security and eligibility for those programs that were based on proof of financial need. These programs were financed with general tax revenue. Roosevelt's idea was to provide a form of social insurance rather than welfare, following a pattern that was becoming widespread in Europe. As conceived, his social insurance program would address the permanent problem of economic security for the elderly by creating a work-related contributory system in which workers would provide for their own retirement security through taxes they paid while employed. Thus, it was an alternative to reliance on welfare and could be seen as a moderately conservative yet activist response to the challenges of the Great Depression. In 1934, FDR formed a commission called the Committee on Economic Security to make recommendations to address economic insecurity. His instruction to the committee was, quote, "We must not allow this type of insurance to become a dole through the mingling of insurance and relief. It is not charity. It must be financed by contributions, not taxes," unquote. Despite his wishes in the drafting of the proposed legislation, several members of the committee added a provision allowing for a portion of the funding to come from general revenues. When Roosevelt discovered this, he immediately had those provisions removed. Thus, it was established in the eyes of the public, excuse me, I just need to get something changed here, in the eyes of the Republic, that the Social Security would be entirely paid for by employee and employer contributions. When the Social Security Act was passed in 1935, it provided for an amount equal to Social Security taxes be appropriated into a, quote, reserve account at the Treasury. As concerns grew that the taxes were actually being used for general government expenses, in 1940, Congress created a separate walled-off entity still within the Treasury to replace the reserve and named it the Federal Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund. By creating a separate entity, Congress hoped to assuage concerns about Social Security tax revenues being used for general government expenses, but it did not actually do that. What it did do was create the appearance, a fiction really, that tax revenues were held exclusively to pay benefits. It did this by creating a structure, the trust fund, that required congressional authorization for any transfers not expressly permitted by the Social Security Act. By the Social Security Act. As a practical matter, when it was necessary to avoid the trust fund insolvency, Congress overrode these restrictions, making them irrelevant, and is almost certain to do so again when the need arises. Initially, the appropriated funds would immediately be used to purchase both marketable and non-marketable government bonds that carried a fixed rate of interest of 3%. Later, in 1960, only non-marketable government bonds would be used, and the interest rate was set based on bonds with a duration longer than 4 years. As far as the Treasury's balance sheet is concerned, the purchase of government bonds is a wash, since they create both an asset and a liability in the Treasury's books. Also, interest paid by the Treasury on the non-marketable bonds has no effect on the Treasury's finances, as it represents both income and expense. We'll be talking more about the non-marketable bonds later. For now, I will say that although this is intra-governmental debt that we owe to ourselves, it is real debt in the same sense as debt that is held by the public. As I see it, non-marketable bonds represent deferred publicly held debt, since when it is redeemed to pay benefits, it is replaced by new publicly held debt with the government debt outstanding, total government debt outstanding, unchanged. While the financing process mechanics may seem complicated, the simple truth is that general tax revenues have been used from the very beginning to pay Social Security benefits. What Roosevelt had intended to happen was not realistic in the context of how federal government finances actually operate. There was no way to sequester revenues raised for one purpose to be used only for that purpose, since all tax revenues end up in the Treasury's general fund, and all government spending is made from the general fund. There are no separate pots to pay federal expenses. This is not only true for Social Security, it's also true for all dedicated tax programs like Medicare and the Highway Trust Fund. Here's how Social Security Trust Fund financing works. Disregarding the timing of the actual timing of fund flows, the trust fund is credited with an amount of funds equal to not only the Social Security payroll taxes, but also certain taxes on Social Security benefits that have been paid. These two pieces are referred to as the non-interest income to the trust. In addition, interest is credited on the non-marketable bonds that are already in the trust fund. All credits are immediately used to purchase additional non-marketable government bonds from the Treasury, with the funds flowing back to the Treasury's general fund. As previously mentioned, since the trust fund exists as an entity within the Treasury, the non-marketable bonds become an asset of the trust fund, but also a liability of the Treasury. As far as the Treasury is concerned, the non-marketable bonds, therefore, are a wash, and the process is just a mechanism to facilitate getting the Social Security tax dollars into the general fund and available for any government expense. When it comes time to pay Social Security benefits and expenses, to the extent needed, the Treasury redeems the non-marketable bonds with dollars from the general fund. However, as with the purchase of the non-marketable bonds, their redemption is also a wash within the Treasury's books. In essence, the crediting and debiting of the trust fund is actually just moving funds from one pocket of the Treasury to another. From the federal government's perspective, a pay-as-you-go system is one in which expenditures are made from the funds in the Treasury's general fund, regardless of how they got there. As previously explained, all tax revenue, whether general income tax revenue or so-called dedicated tax revenue, is commingled in the general fund to pay any government expense. I hope that my dog barking in the background is not bothering anybody. For Social Security, all benefit payments are made from the general fund without regard to where the money came from. If Social Security taxes exceed the amount required to pay benefits and expenses, the excess is used to purchase additional non-marketable bonds from the Treasury, with those funds coming back into the Treasury's general fund and made available to pay other government expenses. With incoming taxes greater than benefit payments, the federal deficit is reduced by the excess, all other things being equal. If Social Security taxes are insufficient to cover benefit payments and expenses, as has been the case since 2010, the difference is funded by redemptions of non-marketable bonds to the extent that they are available. Redemptions are made by the Treasury authorizing repurchase of the non-marketable bonds at par from the trust fund, with the funds making a round trip to the general fund to pay benefits. In this event, when expenditures exceed revenue, the difference becomes an increase in the federal deficit. This has important implications for resolving the trust fund, the solvency issue that I'm going to be discussing shortly. If Social Security taxes and non-marketable bonds are not sufficient to pay benefits when due, benefit reductions can only be avoided by congressional authorization to transfer non-marketable bonds from another trust fund, or by authorizing use of the funds in the general fund, or by statutorily increasing the non-marketable bonds by a process that I'll describe shortly. As before, the federal deficit is increased here too by the difference between the expenditures and Social Security taxes. Note that when the Social Security Trust Fund did not have enough non-marketable bonds to pay benefits when due in the early 1980s, Congress authorized transfers from the Disability Insurance Trust Fund and also from general revenues. In the period 2010 to 2013, Congress authorized transfers from the general fund to offset certain Social Security tax relief that was provided to self-employed taxpayers. When Congress wanted to find a way to get around the trust fund restrictions, it just made it happen through legislation. As a practical matter, if the Social Security Trust Fund never existed, the total federal debt and the deficit would be no different than it is today. As mentioned at the outset, the Social Security Trust Fund is projected to run out of money in about 10 years, or around 2033. Should nothing be done to address the problem, Social Security benefits in those in pay status and those coming up would need to be cut by about 25%. Of course, no one expects that to happen. To prove this point, this is only the second time when Social Security Trust Fund faced insolvency. As previously mentioned, the first time in the early 80s led to congressional action to permit the interfund transfers and transfers from the general account. Now, when insolvency is projected in 2033 or so, the size of the shortfall, projected to be $546 billion, will be too great to be addressed with interfund transfers. And there's no politically feasible reduction in benefits or increase in taxes or any combination that will keep the trust fund solvent. There really is no way to avoid the benefit reductions that would come from the trust fund insolvency other than for congressional authorization of borrowing or outright appropriation from the Treasury's general account, or statutorily enhancing the number of non-marketable bonds in the trust fund. The curious thing is this. In the research for my paper on which this presentation is based, I communicated with folks from academia, the American Academy of Actuaries, the Social Security Administration. Also, I reviewed congressional recommendations being evaluated by the Social Security Administration and the Congressional Budget Office. And unless I missed something, other than analysis provided by Randy Wray, Stephanie Kelton, and a couple of other MMT-oriented economists, none of the others included this straightforward answer, but rather focused on various ideas for benefit reduction and or tax increases, none of which will solve the trust fund insolvency issue for 2033. Each year, the actuaries of the Social Security Administration prepare a short-term 10-year and a long-term 75-year projection of income and expense using three sets of assumptions ranging from more optimistic to less. In these projections, the actuaries develop something called the actuarial balance, which is essentially the level percentage increase in Social Security payroll taxes necessary to avoid trust fund insolvency over the 75-year period of the long-term projection. No recommendations are made to resolve the insolvency issue, just the calculation. As the above chart shows, the percentage has increased over the years with a period of relative stability in the early 2000s. As you see, the most recent calculation in the actuarial balance shows that if implemented today, payroll taxes for the combined Social Security and disability trust funds, which are now 12.4%, for both employees and employers combined, would have to be increased by almost 30%, or to a little over 3.6%, increase to a total of 16%. Virtually all of this is attributable to the Social Security portion, which is 10.6% currently and would need to rise 34% to 14.2%. One thing that is notable about this chart is that despite the many years of increasing actuarial balance, which is published every year by the Social Security Administration, nothing has been done by Congress to address the issue. This chart shows the excess of Social Security payroll taxes and taxes on certain Social Security benefits received over benefit payments and expenses. This difference, when positive, reduces the federal deficit, as the excess revenue is available to use for other government expenses. When the difference is negative, as it has been since 2010, the federal deficit increases, all other things being equal. In 2023, there was a federal deficit of $1.7 trillion, of which the Social Security shortfall of about $128 billion represented about 7.5%. In 2032, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, estimates that the federal deficit will be $2.25 trillion, while the Social Security actuaries project that the shortfall of non-interest income relative to benefit payments and expenses to be about $300 billion, or about 13.5% of the deficit. The problem here, of course, is that these projections, along with increasing focus on federal debt and deficit, are causing all sorts of draconian benefit reduction proposals to be considered by legislators and others. Though not addressed by me today, a very similar outlook applies to the Medicare Part A trust fund, the hospital insurance portion, and in fact, almost all of the other large trust funds. This chart shows the Congressional Budget Office projection of Social Security revenues and outlays over the next 75 years. In their projection, Social Security outlays increased by less than 2% of GDP over the period. This is about a 2% differential here. As I see it, the only way to resolve the short-term insolvency issue is to acknowledge that the funds will need to be made available from the Treasury's General Fund as it was in the 1980s when the trust fund last faced insolvency. By the way, this is no different than already occurs for the Medicare Parts B and D, the Federal Employees Retirement System, and the Highway Trust Fund, among others. Once the short-term problem has been addressed, number one on my hit parade for resolving the long-term trust fund insolvency issue is to replace the employee share of the Social Security payroll taxes with an across-the-board percentage increase in income tax rates such that the overall impact is budget neutral. As I point out in my paper, Social Security taxes are regressive in nature. Replacing them with a deficit-neutral increase in income taxes would increase tax rates by 18%. While that may seem like a lot, taking into account the elimination of the employee portion of the Social Security payroll tax would mean that using the 2023 tax brackets, marginal income tax rates would actually decrease for individuals filing under the single employee workers filing with earnings less than $231,000, and for married couples filing jointly for those with income less than $462,000. Again, I'm going to say that for these people, there would be a overall decrease in their marginal income tax rates. I also believe Congress should formally recognize that the Social Security Trust Fund is not what it appears to be and consider eliminating it. While this may seem to be all but impossible politically, the government studies are beginning to show that the largest trust funds are, like the Social Security Trust Fund, in decline and facing insolvency as the dedicated tax revenue is insufficient to meet program expenses. If eliminating the trust fund is not feasible, then either remove the statutory restriction on borrowing from the Treasury's General Fund or increase the interest crediting rate on non-marketable bonds, since it's defined by statute anyway. Note that increasing the interest rate on non-marketable bonds would eliminate the threat of trust fund insolvency while having no impact on net interest paid by the Treasury, nor would it have any impact on the deficit. Also, while increasing the interest credits on non-marketable bonds will prevent the trust fund from becoming insolvent, once converted to non-marketable bonds, it does not alter the fact that those non-marketable bonds will need to be redeemed in order to support benefit payments. Finally, it is reasonable to be concerned about the deficit, but it's not the size that should be worrying, but rather the potential for rising inflation. Therefore, as former Federal Reserve chairs Greenspan and Bernanke have indicated, there needs to be a greater focus on providing real resources, goods, services, skilled employable persons. As has been pointed out by others, increasing taxes or reducing benefits will not address the long-term inflation problem, but rather exacerbate it. So I welcome your comments and questions. You can post them here now, or you can send them to me at this email address, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Ed. Very interesting presentation. We now will move on to Wray and the final talk of the day, who's a senior scholar at the Levy Economics Institute. He's also a professor in our graduate programs, as well as the 22-23 Tepola Distinguished Visiting Professor at Willamette University in Oregon. His latest two books are Making Money Work for Us and Money for Beginners.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to talk about a small portion of a Levy working paper that is co-authored So you can look on the web if you want to see the whole story. I'm going to focus on a narrow part of it and focusing on a related but different issue from the previous two presenters. So 100 years ago, Keynes wrote a little pamphlet which asked the question, what are the economic possibilities for our grandchildren? And he predicted that the economic problem may be solved, or at least within sight of a solution over that 100 years. So the question is, was the mission accomplished? Well, he wrote that in the time of my grandmother, and so I'm one of those grandkids, and some of the listeners here probably are too. What could we look forward to? 3-hour shifts or a 15-hour work week? And you do have a living standard that is considerably greater than what your parents had, but we probably are the last generation that will enjoy that. And you are still working 40 hours or more. And if you ever get to retire, you've already heard, whether you're relying on Social Security or your private pension, your prospects look grim. Your aging will impose an unbearable burden on your grandkids. So everyone's talking about the demographic time bomb. Aging supposedly places an unsustainable burden on government finances, with workers paying taxes into public pensions. Just one second here. With fewer workers paying taxes into public pensions. Standards & Poor warns that in the absence of policy action to cut age-related spending, the median net general government debt will rise to 102% for the rich countries and 155% for the emerging nations. The New York Times had a piece, how do you adapt to an older world and pay for the inevitable pension time bomb, ticking in the background as a super ager? I guess the oldest ones here, we're all super agers, reaches retirement age. How? Governments are raising retirement ages, cutting promised benefits, increasing taxes, and proposing privatization to increase returns. Those are the solutions that are being talked about in order to deal with the ticking time bomb. I was in college, we all had to read the Ehrlich book, The Population Bomb, where he and his wife announced the battle to feed all of humanity is over. In the 1970s, hundreds of millions of people are going to starve, and nothing can prevent a substantial increase in the world death rate. We must rapidly bring the world population under control. Now, what's our problem? Population bust. So is the mission accomplished? China is increasingly likely to grow old before it gets rich, consigning millions of Chinese to penurious and often lonely old age. So thank you, one-child policy. The global population is aging and eventually shrinking due to the twin effects of rising longevity and falling birth rates. And so this is our population time bomb now. Although thankfully, longevity in the United States is actually falling. Thank you to the anti-vax and guns and opioids. The world is aging. The share of the population 65 and older is rising and projected to continue to do so. So Korea will soon have 50% of its population 65 years and older. The United States is relatively young for a developed country, but as you can see, the bottom line here is the world. We're all on a path to increasing the percent of the population that is aged. And the speed of aging by region is increasing. One way to measure the speed of aging is to see what percentage of the population the percent of population over age 65 grows from 7% to 14%. So that's a measure of the speed of aging. It took France, which was the first country to achieve this, 115 years. Japan has recently done it in 26 years. The United States took 68 years. In developing countries, it's pretty amazing how quickly they are aging. So China will do it in 30 years, and Tunisia is projected to do it in just 15 years. Now, we hear these science fiction-like stories of longevity increasing tremendously, maybe 150 years, maybe 200 years. This is extremely unlikely. The reason is that although some people may make it to 120 years old, the death probability rises very, very quickly beyond age 100 until it reaches 100%. And although this will shift out to the right, it's probably going to be pretty slow. If we look at the fertility rates, these are the most populated countries in the world. You can see all but 2 of those already have reached 0 replacement rates. So below 2.1 children per woman. And the 2 countries that still are growing rapidly because they have high birth rates are projected to join the rest of us and reach fertility rates that are below replacement numbers. So what I'm getting at is it's low fertility that trumps longevity and leads to falling populations. It's likely the global population will begin to fall within a generation or 2, although there's a wide range of estimates because it depends so much on the fertility rate. If the difference of half of a child results in a spread between 6 billion as the population peak and a high of 15 billion, just half of a child will make that difference. But in any case, exactly when the population will turn around and go negative, there's no doubt that we're having fewer kids and we will have more, and that both of those must be supported. So what really matters is not the aged ratio, it is the total dependency ratio, because we have to take care of both children and seniors. The question is that rising? Here is the US dependency ratio. The orange is the age, the blue is the young. And in 1965, my parents' generation supported about 1 dependent per adult. My family was average. We had 3.7 children. We had 4 grandparents and 1 great-grandparent in 1965. And with the falling fertility rates, but rising aging, we enjoyed a demographic dividend in this period here in the 80s and through the early 2000s, where the dependency ratio was constant. But it is rising now and will continue to rise, and it will get almost back where it was in 1965. So my point is, my parents' generation supported more dependents than is projected for as far out as we are projecting things. Let's look at China. In China, the average family back in 1965 average woman, had 7.5 children. And so you can see that the age dependency ratio was extremely small back in the 50s, 70s, 90s, and that is rising. But the youth dependency ratio fell dramatically, and it was falling before the one-child policy. So I was sort of joking about that. It would have happened anyway. And China, like the United States, is only going to reach a dependency ratio that it already experienced, about 1.2 dependents per person of working age. What's the burden of the aged? Going forward, the average human might spend 25 years as a young dependent. I'm assuming that we're going to extend youth as we have been doing. And 25 years as an age dependent, maybe a bit longer if longevity does continue to increase. I'm very doubtful on that. And then 40 years as a worker. In real terms, workers always bear the burden of taking care of the young and the old. Now, currently, most of the financial burden of the young is put on families, while for the aged, most is borne by the government. And it's this transparency of government elderly support that raises concerns about the sustainability, the impacts on the budget, and all of that. And so there has been talk actually since the early 1980s about how can we reform Social Security to make it sustainable. Well, cutting Social Security moves financing back to the household. More seniors today and tomorrow would become impoverished and forced to rely directly on their children for support. Workers would have to support within their own households both the seniors and the children. That's the system we had before Social Security. So reform is often portrayed, especially by people like Kotlikov, as achieving intergenerational justice by raising taxes and cutting benefits now to avoid burdening our grandkids. In reality, it financially burdens workers today by raising their taxes, and it increases the insecurity of future seniors who are going to end up being supported by their children. Most of the focus is on the financial burden. Retirement at the individual level is a financial issue, and Teresa talks about that and focuses on pension insecurity of the pension system. It's a financial issue. Will I have enough money saved for my old age? But from the perspective of society, sustainability of its retirement system depends on real resources and worker productivity. So let's do a thought experiment. Suppose we increase taxes for Social Security, but we don't have enough workers with productivity sufficient to produce all the goods and services needed by the entire society. Then our retirement system is solvent in financial terms, but it's not sustainable. We can send the Social Security checks to the seniors, but that income will compete for a limited output. It leads to inflation. It erodes the purchasing power of those checks, and so we do not give them a decent retirement. Let's try another thought experiment. There was a lot of talk of AI this morning. Imagine robots produce everything. There's plenty for humans, and the robots never need wages, never pay taxes, and never retire. The needs of humans of all ages can be satisfied. However, since the robots don't pay taxes, Social Security goes bankrupt, even though the supply of output is plentiful. All we need to do is give seniors income to distribute a fair share of output to them, and the robots won't care. Although there could be a political fight about the distribution between young and old, there's no question about sustainability of this retirement system. Sustainability is about production and distribution of output and income, and not finance for society as a whole. Returning to Keynes. Assume Keynes is right and extrapolate growth of capacity for the next 100 years, because we didn't solve the economic problem yet. Give us another 100 years and say we solve it globally. Ignore climate catastrophe, war, unemployment, and other man-made disasters. Recognize all countries face aging, as I've already said. We cannot rely on beggar thy neighbor immigration or imports. And notice how we've switched the beggar around. Importing, you're beggaring the other nations, or taking their population away from them is beggaring them. So we won't allow that. Distribution has to be equitable within and across nations, and distribution will be accomplished through financial means. Of course, we could just give people the housing and the clothes and food they need, but let's do it through the market system. What's the best way to finance the distribution? The current practice is to use a combination of public and private pensions, private savings, family support. As you've heard, the U.S. uses a trust fund savings, payroll taxes, employer-supplied pensions, and private tax-favored savings. So what are the problems with the system we've got? The impact on the government budget. Extremely insufficient private savings, except at the top. Risky and underfunded private pensions. So Teresa's been writing about all of this for years. Labor costs because of the payroll tax, and a competitive race to the bottom domestically and internationally. And the burden on the family, the luck of the draw, the number of siblings and long-lived parents there are. You have to pity the unlucky only child whose parents live a long time. And unfortunately, that's going to be the majority of humanity in the future. So does more saving help provision seniors? Keynes in the general theory talks about sinking funds. And he says society as a whole cannot save in financial terms for the future. Saving is a leakage. It's a deduction from income. All else equal, a higher propensity to save, whether it's firms or consumers, means lower effective demand and lower growth. A bigger government sinking fund, such as a Social Security trust fund, will also reduce demand and growth. That makes it harder to provision in the future for the elderly. Or we can take the win godly sectoral balance approach. Fear of government deficits and debts leads to proposals to shift the financial burden of age onto private sector saving. But if private sector successfully saves for retirement, the government, by identity, will be running a deficit anyway, because the private sector surplus equals the government's deficit. Because remember, we're ruling out beggaring our foreign senior neighbors. So we're running a balanced trade account. So what would be a retirement system to promote Keynes's economic possibilities? A pay-go public system with generous and equal payments to all seniors. So it would be like traditional Medicare in the United States. Everybody qualifies as age 65. Seniors need health care, but they also need adequate food, clothing, shelter, transportation, education, and recreation. This reduces the need to accumulate savings with numerous benefits. It reduces the growth imperative, growth in order to save, in order to accumulate financial wealth, environmental damage that results from that, the precarity of young and old, and what Keynes called money love. The love of money will be recognized for what it is, a somewhat disgusting morbidity, one of those semi-criminal, semi-pathological propensities which one hands over with a shudder to the specialists in mental disease. We can end the love of money with a safe and secure retirement system. So thank you. We'll stop.
Okay, thank you, Randy. I invite all of the participants to drop their questions in the chat box. Just to start off, I think that this would be a good way to organize the Q&A to talk about the financial aspects of this so-called retirement, or Social Security crisis versus the real aspects of the provisioning. So the first question that I have is actually from the chat box from Mac Regan for Ed. Ed, I like your proposal that attempts to solve the so-called accounting insolvency problem, as well as along with the regressivity of the Social Security tax, the payroll tax. Is this what you would propose also for Medicare and Medicaid, to eliminate those taxes and instead increase income taxes in a more progressive fashion to offset those?
The short answer is yes. As a practical matter, I mean, we would like to do things a little differently as Randy laid them out, but politically, I don't think that that is going to be such an easy thing to accomplish. So my belief is that all of these trust funds are going to run out of money. The Medicare Part A trust fund runs out of money at about the same time as the Social Security trust fund runs out. The Highway Trust Fund is running out of money. All of them are doing so. And so the only way to deal with that, is to take this same approach that I was recommending for Social Security, which is either get rid of the trust funds altogether, which comes back to basically Randy's idea, or to keep them going, but to seed them, if you will, with interest credits sufficient to keep them intact, but the same process will be going on, because the only way to seed them is to increase tax dollars or borrowing, so that money can come into the trust fund and then back out, and keep them from insolvency. So the short answer is yes.
just to clarify the connection between your presentation, Ed, and Randy's, if I'm understanding this correctly, you're essentially describing a pay-go system, because the way payments are made, they come out today, taxes come in today, and we just have this kind of separate record of a non-marketable security that for some reason holds hostage the future payments of retirees. And so in some sense, right, when the non-marketable securities get redeemed and depleted, we kind of stop this process that's already taking place, right? Writing a social security check and then receiving tax revenues. So basically, the idea here is to kind of remove this fiction of the payment and just continue as we go along. But Randy, when you say pay go, do you mean to provide payment for all elderly, or are those connected to labor market status? Is this just kind of like a basic income that somebody is going to receive at 65 age and older? And then that would connect to kind of Teresa's concern that, not everybody's covered adequately by Social Security. A good amount of people are, but not adequately. So is this your proposal?
Yep, just like Medicare. So we don't require that you have worked. If you reach if you can live long enough to reach 65, you get Medicare. You should get Social Security, retirement pay too, I believe. And I didn't talk about disabilities and so on. So of course we need to support people at younger ages if they have disabilities. So yes, the answer. Now, by PAYGO, I don't mean that we need to match tax revenue with the spending. Now, we probably do need, if we get rid of the payroll tax, we may need to increase the progressive income tax, because we don't want inflation. That's the purpose of the tax, to make sure we're taking enough demand out of the economy so that we can increase the demand by seniors, people with disability, and so on. So that will depend. We can't say in advance what the tax rate will need to be. Okay, we will have to set it as we go along and determine whether we're adding too much demand.
Yeah, thanks for this. And Teresa, just to stay with the financing question for a bit, you've studied, for many years the problems with Social Security. It is a comprehensive system in the sense that it provides coverage for something like 97% of adults, but inadequate, wholly inadequate. And you've been involved in so many policy conversations and drafting bills, etc. You have a couple of new proposals, but staying with Social Security, what are the openings to improving Social Security, not along the lines of raising the age, but on raising, for example, the minimum that one would get irrespective of the income that they earn? Or are there any other openings on Social Security that could improve the system from your conversations?
I think the panel, I'd love to hear the panelists too. We really have to imagine the Social Security system to do more than what it's doing. It is a very trusted system. It's a very efficient administration. And there are so many people out there who trust the system and want to actually put money out of their pockets, out of their paychecks, and save for their retirement. So if Social Security could open it up so that people could buy extra credits into Social Security, I would imagine big pockets of the population putting more money into the system on a pay-as-you-go basis, and to increase their annuity. One proposal I've had is for people to be able to buy bridge annuities, to take their 401k money or their IRA money. It could be as little as $10,000, $20,000, $100,000, even $400,000, and buy more Social Security credits with that money and delay collecting Social Security until they're 70, so they can get a higher monthly benefit. The point is that the Social Security system is a really good place for people to buy lifetime income at a discount. And I've worked with many low-income people who collectively bargain for health insurance, vacation time, wages, and a little bit in the pension money. And I know people who work in hospitals, who are clerks, who are very low-income workers, even at minimum wage, who want to put more money towards Social Security. So this could be actually a financial vehicle for most of the population, and thereby increase the scope of the system.
Can I jump in here? I'm going to push back on that, Teresa. From the statistics that I see, first of all, there are opportunities for people to put more money away right now. They can put money away into their 401k. They can put money away into a savings bank. They can put money away in a lot of different ways, but they're not doing it because wages are insufficient for them to do it.
That's not the reason. That's not the reason, Ed. When people are in unions at even very low wages, they bargain collectively to put their money away because they can trust those institutions. People can only put money away in a 401k if their employer offers it. The IRA system is quite high fee. Those are where we see a lot of predatory institutions. So the design of the system, the failure of the system is not because individuals don't want to save. It's the design of the system that doesn't let people do it automatically. I've always advocated, and I think you both might disagree with me, for a way for people to add to their Social Security and advance fund their system. I don't know of any effective pension system on the planet that just relies on a pay-as-you-go basis. It is too insecure, and it's often too expensive. So I think this is where Randy and I have had lots of conversations, but we need a hybrid system where we do have some advanced funding.
For what it's worth, the federal employees retirement system and the military retirement system both depend on general revenues.
Well, the thrift savings plan,
they do have contributions, but both of them get general revenues.
Yeah, just to drill down, there's a proposal in Congress by Republicans and Democrats that come from some of my work, and that is to open up the thrift savings plan. That's the federal plan to all workers, and if you're low income, the federal government from general revenues would pay for your match, and we would get, and you wouldn't have to depend upon your employer and your bargaining power to get that match. So this is a bill in Congress that would, I think, does follow your principles, bring in general revenues into low income, low earners retirement accounts. Yeah.
So we're back to are we facing a financial problem versus are we facing a real provisioning problem? And certainly the politics are such that it is, everybody is laser focused on the financing and looking for various financing vehicles, which is why I was asking, are there possibilities to look at the Social Security system? Because it's not just retirement that we're looking at. It also is more comprehensive. It covers children. It covers people with disability. We haven't talked about that either. And just kind of essentially having a government guarantee, which to me, that minimum payment of Social Security is that fundamental government guarantee that depends on the public purse and is not contingent on performance of the stock market, private funds performance, and that sort of thing. But maybe we can, unless you have other input on this question, we can move on to some of the real sides of this problem. Teresa, how do you think about the problem of the real provisioning in the context of the U.S. economy, where you're absolutely right. We are so focused on people working longer, which had been happening, I think, prior COVID. The labor force participation rate had been edging up for 65 and older. Very alarming that people with disabilities, 55 and older, their labor force participation rate has been edging up. But at the same time, like prime working age labor force participation rates are much lower than our, OECD countries. So in some sense, we do
Yeah.
need people to be producing the goods and services. So how are you thinking about that, kind of like teasing
Yeah.
out that work retirement connection?
Yes, absolutely. We've been relying on sort of desperate supply of tens of millions of older workers to replace their pensions, as a labor force. And that has worked for a couple of sectors, the home healthcare sector, the janitorial sector. Their business model really depends upon that supply of labor. At the same time, the economy isn't working because we're not fully employing people in their prime age labor force. We are so stingy on childcare. That's a structural barrier to labor force participation. Pain, opioid deaths, the kinds of inequality of health and access to health is really another barrier to prime age people working. And we really stand apart from the rest of the world in terms of relying on our older people to work, to keep the economy going. So it's out of the economist range to really talk about what we should do. But if I look at the policy possibilities frontier, based on economies like us, we are really very unusual. The Dutch, for instance, I'm not talking about Scandinavia, which could be just a weird, weird set of countries. I'm talking about the Dutch, who are just as capitalistic, as we are, and have probably don't have as much. They certainly don't have the kind of social cohesion they have in Scandinavia. They managed to keep their poverty levels of the elderly at 3%, much greater labor force participation among women and others. They have a high disability rate, but they don't require them to work, to keep going. So it is a matter of priorities. I want to point out that the money is there for redistributing, because we spend $287 billion in tax cuts just at the federal level, another 20 to 30 billion at the state level, to induce people to save for retirement who don't need any inducement at all. 70% of that $287 billion goes to the very top of the income group, because it's high income people that save in these accounts, and they're the ones that have the higher tax rates. So the tax expenditures for retirement savings are ineffective, and they also are highly, highly regressive, a lot more regressive than the flat payroll tax.
Can I get you to jump in? Yeah, Randy and Ed on this.
Okay. Look, saving is a deduction from the circular flow. What it does is it reduces our income. It reduces our economic growth. I don't really see any social advantage to encouraging saving at all. Of course, it's a good idea for individuals to save, but I'm not convinced that we as a society should be promoting that. What it does is it leads to lower growth. You cannot save as a society for the future except in the form of productive capital equipment. That's the only way you can save for the future. And saving does not promote more capital investment. So I think that it would be a mistake to encourage it. The only time you would want it is like in World War II. We needed people to save in order to free up resources to fight the war. But that's not our current problem. We could get there sometime. Or maybe if we're going to have a huge Green New Deal, in order to save humanity, we might want to encourage saving, to release the resources, to fight for the Green New Deal and fight against climate change. But otherwise, that is not going to ease the burden of aging. It does for individuals, but it doesn't do it for the aged as a whole. We have the money. We can always give people their pensions.
Real quick, Randy, I just reread the general theory part on savings, forgetting Keynes's discussion about why households needed to save. And life cycle was a big part of it. Another part of it was the dignity of actually having some wealth. He called it the sort of the independence notion. And what I took away from this is that government needs to be a deeply dissaver, needs to run deficits all the time to keep the economy healthy. And no self-respecting business should be allowed to run a surplus. Businesses should always be investing in capital equipment and ventures. But the household needed to have a cushion. So that's my macroeconomic take on and justification for my policy recommendations.
One of the things that I think needs to be understood about investing is that the more money that comes into the stock market does not mean that there is going to be more wealth created.
Yeah.
Absent the creation of new shares, all brand new shares, what you're really doing is redistributing the wealth that was already there.
No, absolutely. I'm not pretending that household savings goes into a capital equipment. That's not the way the institutions work. But I'm talking about the household balance sheet has to be part social insurance and claims on their income contingent upon them meeting a certain qualification, disability, children needing it, old age. That's social insurance, but you also need a claim on income, because you have a cushion.
Yeah, it all depends on how insecure people are. And if we don't have a decent retirement system, they're going to be insecure. If we don't care system, they're going to be insecure. And in those cases, they need to save. But look, if they are successful at saving, you're going to increase the size of the budget deficit. So it is not a solution to the deficit problem. It creates the budget deficit. Now,
exactly.
of course, I don't think the deficit's a problem.
Exactly.
Many people do that, and they think they're going to solve the deficit problem by gutting Social Security and getting people to save. It will just restore the deficit.
But without solving the household balance sheet and the great inequality in that, you're forcing people to work. You lower the reservation wage, and my research has shown you're hastening longevity and health effects at older ages. You're actually creating a deficit in lifespan and healthy lifespan.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's grim, really grim.
Seems to me we're back to talking about the financial versus the real aspects. If any financial savings in the private sector is going to be just reflected by the deficit somewhere else, by the government, but ultimately, as the thought experiment that Randy had, when we talk about wealth, we're talking about housing, goods and services. So the kind of deficit that the government needs to dedicate is not for a fund, kind of a sinking fund, but rather for the hospitals that need to be built today, for the community centers, for all of the theaters and various real resources for that good life. But can I ask, Ed, on the financing side, again, on the Social Security Trust Fund, have you been able to find the actual model that the Social Security trustees use to generate their projections? I mean, clearly it's based on the mythology that you have to match, tax revenues for expenditure, but even the kind of projections that go into the modeling, Social Security was declared bankrupt from day one. And here we are, almost 100 years later, we're still talking about the insolvency of the fund. So that's the first question. I don't think that's transparent, the actual model that they have. Some of the assumptions are listed, but not the software and the stuff that gets fed and you can run your own numbers. And question number two, since we have had a precedent in the 80s, what would be, does this make it a non-issue? When the time comes and the trust fund has been depleted, do we just resort to the general fund and call it a day? Or do you think that this is such a legal pickle that we can't sort out?
To answer the first question, Pavlina, it's a standard actuarial valuation called an aggregate method, where the present value of future benefits is determined less the present value of future contributions, and what pops out is that actuarial balance that I showed you the chart of.
But
So
they have
give you
growth assumptions, they have inflation assumptions. I had a student try to dig it up exactly, and we couldn't quite detect the exact, the exact modeling assumptions.
they give
But
you all of the they do give you all of the assumptions, and if you can hire a good actuary, that doesn't include the present company. If you can hire a good actuary, they would be able to reproduce the numbers. And the same thing goes on with the federal employees retirement system and the military retirement system. An actuary is going through the process of taking the present value of two streams, liabilities and assets, and working from there. To the second question. The second question was,
well, the 80s precedent, what do we do with that? Can we use it again?
the whole issue is a political one, as Randy and Teresa have also pointed out. The whole issue is a political one. If people can't get over the fact that trust fund is a mirage, it is a legal entity, but it's a mirage. If people can't get over that, then their only way to avoid trust fund insolvency is to either credit the trust fund with an amount greater than the Social Security taxes coming in, which is just a statutory change, or a little bit more easily done, change the interest rate to, instead of whatever it is now, 5%, say, to 10%. And all of a sudden the trust fund does not become insolvent. But it doesn't change the deficit. It doesn't change the use of general funds, because money comes into the trust fund from general funds, in effect, and then back out. So no matter what you do, the deficit is going to be what the deficit is going to be. And the only way to change that is to increase the taxes or decrease the benefits.
Yeah. Again, if the participants have any questions, drop them in the chat box. Otherwise, I'm happy to carry on with our discussion. And maybe
Dana, the questions are in Q&A. There are two.
but I have only I'm seeing those.
Okay.
But here's something that comes quite clearly from your presentations. I mean, this is not an isolated problem. We're not just talking about retirement, because the fate of the retirees depends on the fate of the working people, but the dependency ratio really has to include younger generations and children. And so in a sense, all of our fates are kind of connected. And in terms of the way we think about policy, we think of them as very, siloed problems, right? We think of a problem for child poverty. We think of, folks with disability. We think of for working conditions. But I think what we're talking about is a new model, a new welfare model for economic security, right? That kind of encompasses these multiple, dimensions of economic insecurity. So how do you, just pulling it up at the big picture level, how do we connect the question of retirement with the question of, let's say, child poverty or people with disability? How do we think of policy? Do we think of it as in these piecemeal ways? This is why I keep coming back to Social Security, because it does have these multiple dimensions to cover these different categories of people, right?
We have to tackle all of them. Education, too. There's unequal access to education, which hinders all of society. And child poverty then leads to problems later on. We need a good workforce with rising numbers of seniors. We can't look at it just as the United States, because the whole world is facing multiple pandemics in a way.
Sorry, Randy, could I bring
Go
you
ahead.
down to the global, to the little, I can't believe I'm quoting Ivanka Trump. This is not the vision to go, but she agreed with you, Pavlina. Let's look at Social Security as a way to solve problems facing families. And she, get the sarcasm out of my voice. She proposed, because she cared about families, that was her portfolio in the Trump administration, to let young families borrow from their Social Security and take a part of their Social Security benefit in the form of a family leave. And therefore that would help families deal with childcare issues. It's kind of not a bad idea, except it's globally a bad idea, because it would, of course, reduce Social Security benefits even more. But it follows up from what the state of California did, which is actually allow people to take money from a surplus from the unemployment insurance plan and use it for family leave. So I like where you're going, Pavlina. I always like where you go, thinking creatively on social policy, is that we could expand Social Security to become a place for family leave insurance. We see this in many welfare states and collectively bargain agreements, that there'll be a vacation fund, a sick leave fund, other kinds of funds. But the idea is that you set aside insurance. It's basically not a fund for which you draw in like a IRA, but it's social insurance. And if you meet certain conditions, collectively, you can actually draw from that income. So that is a really quite an interesting idea coming from Pavlina and Ivanka.
There's a quote of the century. We have just a couple of minutes if you'd like to have some closing thoughts before we end the session. Ed, I'll throw it to you first.
Well, one thing I would say about withdrawing money earlier from Social Security, people would need, in this same comment applies to the thought of having people be able to, Social Security rather, investing in the stock market. Any money that leaves the government is an expenditure of the government. So if it's an investment in the private sector, or if it's a withdrawal for some other purpose, sick leave or whatever it happens to be, that becomes a government expense, and all other things being equal, increases the deficit. So, I don't think that people who think about investing in the private sector, quite get that. Also, investing in the private sector, as I said before, does not increase the amount of wealth in the nation. It just redistributes it.
Yeah. And what's wrong with that?
All right, who wants to go next? I'll give Teresa the last word, but Randy, why don't you go?
Well, I was just going to say,
Nothing, Teresa.
I don't really like the idea of people having money in Social Security that they can take out and do anything with.
No.
What I like is if you meet these qualifications, you get this income. And so if you have a disability, you get this. If you reach age 65, you get this. If you qualify for family leave, you get this. Rather than having a fund that you're drawing down.
Totally. I'm going to end by saying 3 cheers for insurance, and social insurance, because claims on income based on a contingent event is exactly what insurance is. And if we pool our money, everybody can have some security for the things that they need. And if we don't have more economic insecurity, there's going to be much more social unrest and actually a decline in the wealth of our nation. So I am in favor of more social insurance rather than more private accounts so that people can self-capitalize their insurance. That's really stupid. We would be putting $75,000 away in case we needed a kidney transplant. It's really inefficient, and we shouldn't do that for family leave, for disability, for looking at Pavlina for unemployment.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for such an interesting discussion. I mean, if anything, COVID demonstrated is clearly financing is not the question, and we need to find the appropriate methods of providing for economic security, which really means family viability. I think that that's what that means. It's not just a question of can we send the social security check or the retirement check. It is about overall security and kind of lifting the veil of these accounting complications that, confuse people and it creates pretense that we are funding things to tax revenue. I think that was really, really fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm going to close the conference as well with thanks to all of the panelists and all of the participants. It was a great discussion. I wanted, before I let you go, draw your attention to our new podcast, the Levy Institute podcast, which you can find on your favorite streaming platform. Please sign up for our newsletter where we send news on our latest research on our graduate programs, which are also organized around the themes that we have discussed here today. So I hope you found it valuable. Thanks again to the Levy staff that put this together, and I hope to see you at the next event.